So welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Taylor Clem. I'm with IFAS Extension in Alachua County, Florida. And today we have the wonderful master gardeners here, and they're going to speak all about growing wildflowers. Some of our master gardeners, they are specialists in growing wildflowers. So the team that we have actually tuned in today during this webinar are some of the most knowledgeable wildflower volunteers that I think we have around. So before we get started, I just want to let everybody know a little bit about what you see on your screen. You have, as part of our security for today's program, you have the inability to share your camera or use your microphone. That's only the panelists have the ability to do that. But you can still communicate to the panelists. Any questions that you have, put them in the Q&A, and the master gardeners can help answer that as we go through the program. Some of them we may even bring up and read aloud to have our speaker, Lois McNamara, answer those. As well as we also have the chat box. If you put questions in the chat box, we lose those very quickly because as more people type things, it ends up sliding up that dialogue box. But anyway, so please put all your questions in the Q&A. So this is part of our Master Gardener Volunteer Lecture Series, and we do them on the first and third Tuesdays of each month. And today we have Lois McNamara. She is going to be speaking all about growing wildflowers. So before we do get started, feel free to go ahead and in the chat box, let us know, are you growing any wildflowers? Like, what type of wildflowers do you like growing? Or are you interested in growing in your landscape? Feel free to put those in the chat box. Coreopsis. Oh, that's a great one. Blanket flower, sunflowers, daisies. Anything to attract the bees and butterflies. We got you covered today, that's for sure. No, I like this one, not growing any on purpose yet. I am a huge fan, and I know some people will hate me for saying this, is I love Spanish needle Bidens alba. It doesn't have like amazing like ornamental qualities, like if you're gonna put it in an ornamental bed, but it's a beautiful flower, but also what it provides for our pollinators is just substantial. So it's, I mean, incredibly beautiful plant. Swamp sunflower, aster, blue mist flowers. Woo! Yes, Biden's makes the best honey of all. Frog fruit. Yes, I love frog fruit. Bee balm. I love bee balm. I feel like I love all these plants. No matter what plant you put up there, pretty much, I'm going to say I love it. All right. So, oh, that's so wonderful. You all, it's really cool when everyone responds to stuff like that because, you know, we're seeing what you're interested in growing. And it's also nice to know that we'll be able to talk a little bit about that today in this program as well. I also want to put up a poll. And in this poll, we're interested on, are you currently growing wildflowers? And if so, did you start them from seeds? So feel free to go ahead and put your responses within that chat box. Oh, wow. So it kind of looks like y'all are responding right now, and I'll share these results here in a minute. But it looks like we're 50-50, just about, on if you currently have wildflowers. And we actually have more people have not started wildflowers from seed than those who have. Wonderful. I'll go ahead and I'll end the, I'll give it a couple minutes or so. All right. So let's see, share. So now you all should be able to share this. So you can kind of see that of everybody, about 60% already have wildflowers. And of those, it does seem like most people have not not started them from seed, but we did have 26 respondents say that they do start them from seeds. That's wonderful. So what I'd like to do is to kind of make sure that we keep going. And I know that we're really interested in learning about wildflowers. So I'd like to introduce Lois McNamara. She's one of our Master Gardener volunteers here in Alachua County. And she's going to be speaking today about the wildflowers. So Lois, thank you very much. And you can take it over from here.
Okay. Well, those of us who put this program together are just really delighted that so many people are interested in growing wildflowers, because we love them and have been promoting them for years. And usually we have seeds to give away, but since we can't do this live today, it's not like that. So anyway, let me begin by going over what this program will cover. We'll deal with the definition of a wildflower, show you what some other people have accomplished here in our part of Florida, but pretty much what I'm saying would apply to North and Central Florida. And then go over how to prepare a site if you want to make a new wildflower bed or meadow, how to sow the seed and ensure that they come back in future years. And then deal with the fact that some people say wildflowers are messy and I don't want that. And they're afraid to grow them. We'll give you some strategies of dealing with that. And then finally, some sources for the seeds. So I was once giving a program to a group of Girl Scouts, and I asked, well, what is a wildflower? And one young lady very assertively said, a wildflower is a flower that grows without human intervention. And I thought, I bet you she's a good student. But anyway, to deal with what the Florida Wildflower Foundation defines as a wildflower, it is the flowers that grow in the wild or on their own without cultivation. And of course, the Florida Wildflower Foundation is funded by the license plates that some of us indulge in. I think the new one is really beautiful. And they promote wildflower growing and planting and preservation around the state. Now, wildflowers, the definition we're using, will come back on their own. And if they don't, they're not wildflowers here. They might very well be in another place. And I suppose in one sense, every flower started out as a wildflower. But I'm asking, and this is the assumption we make, if you buy the seed of the plants that grow wild in our area and plant them in your yard or sow them in your yard, we can still think of them as wildflowers, right? So even though we're giving them a boost or we're giving them a start in cultivation. So why should we grow wildflowers? Well, they're beautiful and they're interesting, and they provide seed for the birds, and they provide habitat for insects. And of course, all birds need insects. Even if they're ordinarily seed eaters, they need to feed their young, the insects. And some of them are host plants for our butterflies that we love. And they, of course, serve as pollinator plants. And bees are the most well-known pollinators, and we see them here. I think these are both honeybees. I'm not really sure about that one, but this one definitely looks like a honeybee. And these are wildflowers in our area. And then we have a sweat bee over here, which is a native bee. And it's one of the bees that doesn't live in colonies. And we really need those native bees too, especially if we're losing our honeybees. And they are not aggressive, so you don't need to be worried about them stinging you. So where do we see wildflowers? Well, we sometimes see them in meadows, and maybe you've seen them in meadows in the national parks where the soil conditions ensure that we don't have trees and shrubs there. And they can be very impressive where the flowers grow with the grasses and continue year to year. And of course, we see them beside the roadsides and various undisturbed areas. If we were doing this live, I'm sure there'd be some oohs and ahs at this point. I mean, who can not be impressed by that? This is the wildflower patch or meadow of one of the people who's answering your questions today, our Master Gardener, Wilma. She and her husband created this meadow in 2008 after their children had left home and the playing field was no longer being used for soccer or tossing frisbees. And in 2012, she said the view was especially impressive, and somebody with a good eye for composition, maybe it was Wilma, took that photo. I love those two blue chairs there in the distance. And if I think that photo won't convince you to grow wildflowers, nothing will. So some other wildflower patches that homeowners have grown here. This is my friend Jessica. She used to live out in rural Alachua County. Then they had 7 acres. And in the area between their house and the road, she started with the phlox that we see beside the road. And then she added Coreopsis, bacillus, and some other wildflowers, including this larkspur, which is not a flower that originally grew in the United States or in North America. It's actually from Europe, but it is naturalized here. So it's, if you have it and you get the seed from another gardener, it will continue to come back, and it's a nice contrast to the yellows. And another view of this wildflower patch that Jessica established. And she also sowed seeds for flowers that grow in the summer and bloom in the summer and into the fall. And of course, we see them beside the roadsides. Every spring, there's this beautiful show of phlox along 75th Street. I don't know who sowed them originally. I am told that the Florida Federation of Garden Clubs started sowing wildflowers along the roads as far back as the 1930s. And then when Lady Bird Johnson was our first lady, she started the Keep the America Beautiful program, and there was another push to seed the roadsides with wildflowers. And actually, the Florida Department of Transportation had started before that in the early 60s. And here's another view of the phlox in Alachua County. Here you can see they're spreading from the roadside into this field, which is probably pasture or hay maybe. And last spring, my husband and I were driving from High Springs back to Gainesville, and we saw this really good showing of the Coreopsis. I understand the city of High Springs was responsible for this showing. And another city that does that is Newberry. They have really been praised for the show that they put on in the streets or the roads coming into Newberry. And for several decades now, there have been a good wildflower showing at the different service plazas on the Fort LaPlante Turnpike. This is the Okahumpka Service Plaza. And my daughter and I were traveling to a wildflower symposium in Orlando a couple years ago. And so we stopped here and got out to see which wildflowers were blooming. They're a little bit past their peak right here. And then I think you could consider this a sort of an untended area. Every spring in this pecan grove in Hampton, Florida, there is this marvelous showing of wildflowers, mostly Coreopsis. And probably that's because pecan trees are the last trees to leaf out in the spring. And so through the winter months and in the early part of the year, these seedlings would get plenty of sun, which they need to develop. I'm told that Stark High School graduates will often put on their graduation gowns and go out here and have photos made. And I know a young woman who is a teacher at Hampton Elementary, and she said that when her parents got married, they had wedding photos taken in this pecan grove. I don't know who owns it, but the people don't seem to mind if other people come by and have photos and walk through the pecan grove. It's really generous of them. So in order to grow wildflowers, it's important to consider how they grow. And first, they're not taken care of when they're beside the roads. They're not fertilized. They're not on a watering and irrigation schedule. The important thing is that the area is not mowed until the seed has fallen. And fortunately, for most of our wildflowers, they mature and go to flower stage and seeding within a fairly short time. So that within months, you can have the seeds on the ground for the next year again. And here's a photo that demonstrates what is required or not required here. We were traveling in North Carolina a couple of years ago and saw this marvelous stand of Cosmos by Panatis. And I convinced my husband to stop momentarily and take this photo. What you can't see here is this sign, so I've added it, but it said, "Do not mow." So These were probably sown maybe 5 months before, and then until they go to seed in another month or so, the mowers have to not mow here. You can see that they actually have mowed right beside the pavement. And of course, they'll mow again when the whole process is done, because you don't want trees and shrubs growing up there. So to know what to do with wildflower seed, it's just important to keep these things in mind. They need light to germinate. They need good contact with the soil. This means you don't cover the plants, the seeds, when you sow them. They need moisture, of course. They need the right temperature. Almost every species has a window of temperature degrees under which it will germinate. And that's often linked to the right length of day. And some wildflowers will only germinate in a short day, and others would be different. And most of the wildflowers that we're most familiar with here in Florida do need some chill hours. So even though we don't have those cold winters of up north, if you sow your wildflowers at the right time, and for north central Florida, it would be late October, November, maybe as late as December, they will get enough chilling to germinate. And they probably won't germinate until they've had that chilling. So if you want to have a meadow like Wilma and her husband had, here are methods that you can use. There are different methods. What they did is they mowed very close to the ground, set the lawnmower as low as it would go, and each time they mowed twice, they raked up the clippings. And so that leaves between the grass places where there's exposed soil. Or it is legal to use an herbicide. And if you do that, you also would rake off the dead vegetation, and you should wait at least 3 weeks before you sow seeds. More environmentally friendly option would be to cover the area with cardboard and mulch to keep it down. You can even use several layers of newspaper and cover it with mulch. That would take a little bit longer. And then you would rake it off. Or you can solarize, but it's best to solarize in the summertime, so we're a little bit past that time frame if you wanted to do it for this next year. In each case, rake off the clippings. Now, to show you the whole process here, I'm using an example of what the Garden Club did. In 2018, they decided that they wanted to fund some more wildflower plantings in Gainesville. And so they worked with the county horticulturalist, Neil Grisham. And Wilma, who's a Garden Club member, and her husband, volunteered to do the sowing. So they met him on November 1st, 2018, and he brought the safety vest and the cones and the lawnmower, and they mowed this area, first of all. We also had another master gardener, Kathy Stevens, who was taking photos of the whole process. And then they raked up the clippings. And then her husband used his little spreader, like a fertilizer spreader, to sow the seed, to spread it over the whole area. Sometimes these little seeders or fertilizer spreaders might not go to a fine enough consistency. You'd have too many seeds coming out in one place. So then you would add something like vermiculite or sand to make the seed be more spread out. And then there's the tedious part. They went over the whole area, stepping on every square foot, because those seeds have to have good contact with the soil. And Neil had brought the watering tank, and we don't know how many times this was watered after they had sowed. We didn't get that information for him. But generally speaking, if you're doing it in your own yard and we don't have rain for a week, you probably ought to put down some light watering. Be sure you don't wash the seeds away. Don't ever put on high intensity irrigation. And then the important thing is to be patient. Don't get in there and inspect, and don't give up and say, nothing happened. I'm going to go buy some bedding plants. Just stay out of it. I went by a couple of times between then and the beautiful flowers in the spring and took photos. And this is how it looked on February 15th. They were about 3 inches high, And here's a close-up. And all of these lance-shaped leaves, sort of rounded lance-shaped, are little baby coreopsis plants. There's some weeds in here too. We've got some wild geraniums, and over here is one of those Biden's elbow Spanish needles that can sometimes take over. That's my objection to the Spanish needles besides the stickers. But anyway, it's mostly wildflowers. It's mostly coreopsis. And in the end of March and April, we had this glorious show of wildflowers. And people were calling the garden club and saying, congratulations, and how can I do this? And how did you do that? And here's my favorite photo of all, the horticulturalist sitting in the wildflowers that he was instrumental in bringing about. Isn't he a good chum? Okay, so you may not have the space to make a whole meadow. You might want to grow wildflowers in a flower bed that you already have.
Hey, Lois.
Yes.
We actually had a question come in that has to do with timing.
Mm-hmm.
What time of year did you sow these seeds? And what times do you recommend that you would sow seeds like this? Do you get, I don't know if you get to this further on in the presentation or not, but we also had someone ask about it. Like they live in Hillsborough County and we're curious.
Here, we're a little bit north, I imagine, of Hillsborough County. So November would probably be best for Hillsborough. Late October, November works well here. I've sown as late as December, and some of the wildflowers will do fine if you sow them that late, but not before mid-October here. Now, some of North Florida, they recommend sowing in September, you know, in the Panhandle and so forth.
Wonderful. Thank you. So that means everybody should go out and get their seeds right after this presentation or start planning on how to get their seeds.
Right, and getting your bed ready. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you, Lois.
All right. So you may have a bed that you just aren't very happy with and you want to pull things out. Maybe you got some spent bedding plants from last summer or things that you didn't like in the first place. Or you may have a flower bed or border in which you have plants you definitely want to keep, like a few roses, etc. So where you want to get rid of things, you clear the vegetation and lightly till the top layer of soil. It is so important that you don't till deeply. This is not like growing vegetables because there are so many weed seeds in every square foot of soil. And if you go down more than a half an inch or an inch, you're going to be bringing up too many weed seeds that compete with the wildflowers. And then you scatter seeds on the top of the soil and you use the broadcast method if you don't have one of those spreaders, just like farmers and growers have been doing for centuries and millennia. We have Malay's version and Van Gogh's version, which is much brighter and cheerier, isn't it? He was having a good day that day. And then you step on the seeds if you can get around to cover all of them with your feet. If you can't, then just water them in with a light spray with your handheld sprayer on your irrigation hose. And then you have to have patience. As I said, sometimes they won't come up for a couple of months. They have to have the right amount of chilling. They have to have the irrigation at the right time. The rain has to come at the right time. So don't give up. And then watch for the seedlings. But this is a view of the area that I had sown some years back. These are little seedlings right here. They don't have the first true leaves yet, so I can't even tell for sure what they are. But here's that beautiful larkspur that has returned from the previous year. And we have a few perennials here. We've got some border grass, and I think that's a crocosmia, not the healthiest one, but anyway. Now, I wanted to show you how you can have wildflowers at different times of the year. And I am that silly person who loves tulips, and perhaps because I'm of Dutch descent and saw the Netherlands in the tulip blooming season, I order tulip bulbs every year in the summertime. They come in September and early October, and I put them in the refrigerators that I have in the garage. And then December, after they've chilled for 2 or 3 months, I plant them out. And originally, when I planted tulips the first time and the second time and the third time, I cast out some wildflower seed too. So these are baby coreopsis here. Now I don't need to do that. They come back on their own every year. So here, look at, this is the bird girl of Savannah. And that's the way my yard looks in February. And here's the side yard in April. And she's almost engulfed in the coreopsis. And then in late September or October, I have this view in that yard. These were sown by seed. This is blue mist. And originally I sowed them by seed, as I said, but now they come back on their own. The plant stays pretty small through the summer, and then come the month of September, they shoot up, and I have that mass of color. And the rest of the time, I have some perennials, some roses, some lilies, and things to bloom. All right, so there are a lot of wildflowers that we love in Florida, in this part of the state, that should be sown in the fall. And you don't need to worry about writing this down right now because I'm going to show you each of these. So first we have the phlox Drummondii. And there's a bit of a controversy, but we think they were not native to our state. They're from Texas, but they grow very well here. And of course you see them in many places. There's some color variation. And then I already showed you Coreopsis bassalis, the ones that you saw in Wilma's yard and some other yards, in my yard. But there's some other Coreopsis too. This is Coreopsis lanceolata. This is a larger flower and it's a perennial. The flower is about 1.5 to 2 inches across. It's a little slow to get going, but when it does, it reseeds around and it's a nice bloomer through the summer. And we have Coreopsis leavenworthii, which you often see growing beside the road in the ditches because it likes a moist environment, but it will grows very well in my yard. And I only water when we haven't had rain for some time. So it starts blooming not long after the Coreopsis bassalis is done. And I saw a few of these still yesterday, but most of the plants have gone to seed and I've collected that seed. Okay, we have a couple of species that were called in popular parlance Mexican hats because they look a little like sombreros. The middle seed part keeps getting taller and taller. These bloom for a week or two. So this is what that flower looks like up close. And here's a nice bouquet of these Mexican hats, which my daughter gave me for one Mother's Day. She had grown these, and so they were already blooming in May. And then we have a bunch of different Rudbeckias. There are quite a few species of these. There's the Rudbeckia malus, which is known as the soft hair Rudbeckia, and Rudbeckia triloba, which is sometimes called brown-eyed Susans. And then, of course, they're the black-eyed Susans. And who doesn't love a black-eyed Susan? They just are so cheery. So this is the one that looks like the original, but there have been various cultivars that popped up naturally, and then the breeders have played around with it a little bit, and then sometimes they sell it as Gloriosa Daisy. And it really looks nice, I think, as a mixed group. So if you get some of this seed, there'll probably be different varieties of the black-eyed Susan. I like this one that has the dots right next to the center. And there's some of them that have a multicolored petal. And the pollinators like it, of course. Okay, probably the easiest wildflower to grow is Salvia coccinea. It's this red salvia that's a native. And once you have it in your yard, you would never get rid of it. Not that you want to, but it just keeps popping up all over. It's shown here with another native flower, the one that's known as flat top. And another very, very easy wildflower to grow is the blanket flower. It does prefer a dry, sandy place, but if it has that kind of a place, it will just bloom almost all year. And again, it's shown there with the bee. And I love the seed heads too. So if you do floral arranging, you can use, but not just the flowers, but also the seed heads. And it pairs beautifully with beach sunflowers. And I was over at the beach near St. Augustine just last weekend, and these two are growing prolifically there on the dunes. But this view is at a demonstration garden that I used to work at in Orlando when I lived there. And this was part of our Florida-friendly landscape demonstration area. So we have shrubs over here, and there were some perennials, but they just grow very nicely together. And then for a change of color, we have ironweed. Ironweed gets 3 or 4 feet high, and it'll take a little shade too. Oh, I forgot to mention that the Salvia coccinea is one of the few wildflowers that will grow in the shade and bloom in the shade. Probably not quite as much as in the sun, but it will. And ironweed likes to grow at the edge of shade. So if you have a border that's shaded with trees at the back, it's a good place to put it. It blooms through the summer and it spreads gradually. And probably the most spectacular wildflower we have in our part of the state, I think, is the native hibiscus. The blooms are like 5-6 inches across. It gets these pretty seed heads with multiple seeds in them. And there are a couple disadvantages. It does want to grow in a swampy area. So if you have a ditch or a swale, that's a good place for it. And the other disadvantage is the deer love it. So if you have deer in your neighborhood, it probably can't survive. You can also plant it in a large pot that doesn't have a drainage hole and sink it into the ground. And I have one like that on our doorstep, and the deer don't come up that close. I guess there's too much of a human scent. And for one flower that blooms at night, we have the moonflowers. This is our native morning glory. And like a lot of things that bloom at night, not that many do, but if they do, like night blooming cereus, they are very fragrant. So if you step outside and this is blooming, you probably will get that nice whiff at night. Okay, some people don't do so well with wildflowers. The main reason, or one of the main reasons, is impatience, not being willing to wait to see what's going to happen. Another is putting the wildflower seed into an area that doesn't have enough sun. With those 2 exceptions, most are sun lovers, like most flowers. Another thing that can be done wrong is to till too deeply. And I'm reminded of this when I was at the Chelsea Flower Show. One of the veterans handed me one of those little paper poppies that are given out sometimes on Veterans Day or Memorial Day that is associated with our veterans. And he told me that the reason that poppy, which is native in, excuse me, I backed up by moving my cursor. I am so sorry. Let me get back to the right one.
No worries. While you do that, actually, Lois,
Yes.
I'll let you find your spot, but we actually had a question come in from our YouTube page, and someone asked about deer. How much of an impact will deer have on a wildflower meadow once we plant them, or
all right.
how do we manage that?
The resource list that Anne put together of the EDIS documents about wildflowers, one of those is a document on which wildflowers deer will leave alone, or most likely leave alone. Okay, it has the percentages of how often they are attacked by deer.
Perfect.
Okay?
Yeah, thank you.
You'll be sending that out at the end, right?
Yes.
Okay, so as I was saying, this veteran told me that in World War I, and you know how World War I was a trench war, and there was this no man's land in between that kept getting churned up with the artillery and all the shooting. And as the battlefield moved and they buried all of the dead, because back in those days they didn't have, well, for the United States, they didn't have refrigerated ships. So the soldiers were buried in the country where they were killed. The next spring, the fields where they were no longer fighting were just covered with these red poppies. And the reason was because by churning up the soil, the seed of the poppies was brought to the surface. And so we also have that poem that a Canadian poet wrote, John McCrae, that goes, in Flanders field, the poppies grow between the rows, the crosses row on row. And so it is an impressive sight in Europe today. I was in Italy one time in May, and to see the poppies on the hillsides. The point is that the seed needs to be on top of the soil, and you don't want to dig deeply because you're going to be bringing up a lot of weeds, and they can almost always grow faster than the flowers you want. Okay, so another reason for failure would be to sow at the wrong time of the year. Sometimes you can be in a big box store and you see a big box of wildflower seed and think, what a great bargain, you know, only $12.99. But if you go according to the instructions on that box, which probably say, sow after danger of frost is passed in the spring, because the seeds have been put together for most of the country, not for our part of the country, they probably will, with few exceptions, not grow very well or not grow at all. And then, of course, there are years when we don't get enough rain. And if you're getting wildflowers established, you need to put that watering down. Wilma said that she waters, when she started that wildflower meadow, once or twice a week, but only lightly. Usually nature will take care of it, but November is usually a dry month. So to begin with, you probably want to water sometimes. And of course, extreme weather, what can withstand a hailstorm or a hurricane? But anyway, so you want to continue this tradition. Some of the seeds will fall and come up there again, but to be sure and to move the seeds to another place, you want to be sowing at this time of the year. And it's a good idea to collect some of the seeds. You'll never get them all, but you can collect some and you can share them. Okay, so how do you do that? This is a little tricky. This takes some time to figure out or to learn. The seed head should be completely brown, and about at least a ½ inch under the seed head on the stem should be brown. That means the xylem and the phloem are no longer flowing there. And then you can collect that seed. So here's one. They really blended into the site. But here's a flower that is declining and it is not ready to harvest. And for wildflowers and for flowers in general, you want them to dry on the plant. They probably won't develop right if you pick them before they're ripe. Some might, but in general, it's better to wait until they are really brown and ready to be harvested. And then collect the seeds in paper or a breathable container. Don't put them in plastic. They will probably mold, at least not until they're really dry. Don't put them in plastic like a Ziploc bag immediately. My daughter keeps me supplied with Starbucks bags, these with the handles on. So at the time of the year that I'm collecting seeds, I write the names on the sides, and I go out with 3 or 4 of these that I'm liable to get at that time of the year. Usually June and July are my best collection months, and collect seeds and drop them in there each day if I can get out. I don't get out every day, but you could. If I were really rich, I'd love to have a whole set of these shaker style wooden boxes, but that's an indulgence I don't carry out, only the indulgence in the tulip bulbs. So here are some of these seeds. So this is Coreopsis leavenworthii. The seed head is probably about 1/3 of an inch across, and here the seeds are falling out. And a lot of times these seeds will just fall apart in your hand. Sometimes they wouldn't in this morning, but they will at night. They dry that fast. And here's a Rudbeckia hirta bunch of seeds. These can be as much as 1 inch high, and every one of those seed heads probably has at least 200 seeds in it. So these are your individual seeds, and they need to dry for a while in your house. And these are Salvia coccinea seeds right here in the middle. So 1 week the salvia will look like that. In 2 weeks it's like this, and the seeds are probably fallen out. And most seeds have a little bit of extra stuff to make them spread. So these ironweed look a little bit like little brooms, about 1/2 inch long here. And that little bit of whiskey stuff wispy stuff makes them spread a little bit and not just stay where they are. It gives them, you know, a little bit of power to act like a parachute. Okay, so you bring them in breathable containers, and then you crush or shake the seed heads to separate them into individual seeds. And using sieves, you try to get rid of the chaff, the part that is not a seed, though you don't have to worry about it if you're not selling it, you know, being totally clean, because after all, that chaff is just future soil. And then you label them, and be sure you do label your seeds. You think you might remember, but unless you're Einstein, they look so much alike many times that you won't. And the University of Florida has had grad students doing research on what kind of containers are best, and preserve the viability of seeds the best for the best germination rate. And they found out that dark glass is the very best, but not many of us have a lot of amber glass jars around. So glass jars are better than plastic. But you store them in a closet, in a dark closet. Don't store them out in your shed. And you keep them until it's time to sow again. These are some of the tools you could use for separating the seeds. Wilma found a children's sand toy, like they take to the beach, worked quite well for some seeds. You can use household items like this, though I would advise you not to use the same items that you use for your food prep, because some seeds are poisonous, just like some plants. You know, and you could buy them at a thrift store so cheaply, or demote the ones you have and buy some new ones for yourself in the kitchen. And then, because I've done quite a few seed workshops and have been involved with giving away the seeds and packaging them, I bought a set of these sieves that were actually developed for mining, like a panning for gold, that kind of thing. And they were from a company in Montana, and they fit on a 5-gallon bucket just perfectly. So each color sieve is a different size sieve, but you don't have to do that. You can deal with it with the ordinary tools. Okay, so some people are a little bit reluctant to grow wildflowers, and there are a few disadvantages. You can't mulch, or not mulch very much. There's no such thing as getting a load of pine bark mulch and putting it down in your beds 3-4 inches thick, and then saying, there, I don't have to do anything for a half a year. If you do that, your seeds will not come back. A little bit of pine straw, they can get through. And people say, well, wildflowers can be messy. For instance, there was a homeowner who along Southwest 91st Street seeded black-eyed Susans for several blocks. And it really was a pretty impressive show earlier in the summer. But last week, it looked like this. Just a few flowers left, fairly long grass, and the seed heads. Well, you know, along the roadside, that doesn't seem objectionable to me. But if it's in your front yard and you live with an HOA, you might get some notices, right? So, and here, for instance, is Jessica's yard again, and she left these stems of the tall wildflowers she had later in the summer. It's excellent material for our solitary bees, and it's nesting material for birds and for homes for different insects. You know, it's really a good thing for the environment, but some people would object, and if it bothers you, you could go out there and just snap them off. So if you live in an HOA, they might not like it if you have wildflowers on the front. Well, you can plant wildflowers on the side or on the back, and here are some other things you can do. One of the guidelines is to keep your edges clean. So, you know, it's very clear here where we have the lawn and then a distinctly edged flower bed. Now, these are not all wildflowers, but there are wildflowers among them. So who could object to that? Here's another example. This is evidently somebody who lives on a golf course. And you've got this fence defining the area. And then they put in a small wildflower bed. We've got the beautiful Laetris. And I think they are either cutleaf coneflower or black-eyed Susans, I'm not sure. But anyway, I'm growing amongst the ornamental grasses, very neatly defined. Here's another way of defining the space. Got a mulched path, wildflowers on this side, wildflowers on that side, go through the arbor, and then you have the lawn with the lawn chairs.
Lois,
Yes.
we had a question come in that I think it'd be important to talk about because we talked about harvesting seeds.
Yes.
Do you have to harvest seeds each year, or will the flowers reseed themselves?
If they're wildflowers and they're suited to this area, they will reseed themselves. I like to collect some of the seeds. I share it with other people. I can put it in a different place. If your showing was a little thin where you had it last year, you might double sow, the seeds you collected and the seeds that fall. No, you don't have to collect them.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Another thing you can do is to have definite hardscaping that defines where your wildflowers will be. I love this combination. We have the wildflowers, the coreopsis, that larkspur that I showed you before. And then these are the Shirley poppies or the corn poppies. Now in Europe, they are, wildflowers, but here they aren't. But they grow very well, planting them, sowing them at the same time as the wildflowers. So if you like a multiple approach like that and a variation in color, you can do something like that. But this planter is definitely defined with this brick wall there. And again, going to the demonstration garden that I had worked at in Orlando, we sowed wildflower seeds amongst some annuals, and we also had some annual flowers that we sowed at the same time. So we've got the black-eyed Susans and the blanket flower. Those are wildflowers for us. Amongst the ornamental cabbage, and then we sowed some other flowers at the same time, the cosmos here, which are not a wildflower here, at least not that cosmos. Okay, and this was Wilma's solution. She has a border of pentas that last from year to year, and they are very much appreciated by butterflies. You very frequently see butterflies on them. And then she sowed black-eyed Susans amongst them. And again, we've got a bed with some perennials, and we sowed wildflower seeds as well as some other annuals that we sowed at the same time, and they mixed nicely. And here in this bed, you have all the different types of plants. You have perennials like the canna and the kuntis and the aloe. You have annuals. This is loofah vine that produced quite a few loofahs, growing all over that rather unattractive fence. And then we had some wildflowers. We had this kind of cosmos, which does reseed, an obedient plant. So you can have them within an existing bed and not have that messy look. All right, and finally, here's one more example where we have lawn here and a wildflower and perennial bed behind the retaining wall. And then right down here, we have a ground cover, which is a wonderful native plant for our area. This is sunshine mimosa, and you can step on it quite a bit. I guess you couldn't play basketball or baseball on it every day, but it will take quite a bit of foot traffic, and it does spread.
Lois,
Yes.
this goes back a little bit to when you're talking about Flanders Field and the poppies. I know that specific poppy does not grow in Florida because they're just too hot. But do we have any poppies that grow that we would use? Because I think we have like the prickly poppy, but I don't know if people use that or not.
Actually, the corn poppies, which look like the ones I saw in Europe in May, do grow quite well here. And you can get the wildflowers, you can get that seed from different places. Wild Seed Farms, one of the sources I list at the end, provides that. I usually buy some every year because I like the look along with my wildflowers. right?
And
But
oh,
I
absolutely.
also want to mention that this is not the poppy that they make the opium from. Um,
Correct.
that that is a different poppy. And I don't know about that prickly poppy. The
It's
California poppies will grow here also if you sow them at the right time of the year in the fall.
Yeah, we have a Mexican prickly poppy, but I think that's more of a pasture weed. um,
Ah,
but it is a poppy. But it's a beautiful yellow flower. Um,
mhm,
but
okay.
those that way you mentioned is a great resource. What we did actually have I know you're getting closer towards the end, but we did have a question come up that someone on the YouTube channel posted a question about as well. Can you plant if you don't have much space? How well do wildflowers do if you're going to put them in a container?
Hmm. I haven't, I think in a fairly large container they'd be okay. I haven't grown them, I haven't tried to grow wildflowers in a container. Um, but a larger pot, I think you could, yes. I don't see why not. Maybe my participants on this program have some answers there.
That can be something that we can come back to at the end if we can dive into that a little bit deeper. Yeah.
All right. And then so to conclude, another thing you can do if you're strategizing with the HOA is put up a sign indicating why you have those flowers that they might think are a little scraggly or wild looking. I have this sign in my yard, and it's in front of the Salvia coccinea. Got a sunshine mimosa here. We've got the blue mist just starting to bloom, and we have some weeds, of course. They come in too. But the sign tells people that these are good for the birds and the butterflies, and there's probably a bee on that sign too. And you can come up with a different sign, or you get your yard certified by the Wildlife Federation. And it's a fairly simple process. You write and ask for a form and answer their questions. And then if you pay a few dollars, you can have a sign saying that you have a certified wildlife habitat. Um, there's some other things you could say. Butterfly highway, pollinators welcome here, make up your own sign. If you want to get a little sassy, you can say, we're wildflowers, don't mess with us. Okay, so there are advantages to growing wildflowers too. You get so many more for your money when you buy wildflower seed as compared to buying plants. And for a meadow, you only need to mow once a year. You do need to mow to keep the trees and shrubs from growing up. And you can feel good about promoting biodiversity and helping our pollinators. So here are some sources for wildflower seeds. The Florida Wildflower Foundation sells flowers that are native to Florida. And the Wildflower Seed and Plant Growers Association grows seeds for them. And they grow some that are not native to Florida too. And you can oftentimes swap with other friends. Just be sure they really know what they're talking about. I had somebody give me some seeds for what she said were a native flower, a little yellow flower. Well, she was wrong. I've since had it identified authoritatively, and it's a very persistent weed in our lawn. And there's a seed co-op in this area, Working Food. You pay a nominal amount per year, and then you swap seeds with them. They're local ecotypes, that is, cultivars that grow very well in our area, and Wild Seed Farms, which is located in Texas and is very reliable. And sometimes you'll see these boxes at the big box stores, like, as I said, a huge box for only $12.99 or $7.99. Read the label and see if those are species that will grow here, or at least some of them will grow here. And then you'll have to adjust the planting time of what it says. But also read that little fine print where it says 7% seed. They've got a lot of filler in there so that it spreads over a bigger area. They're not really cheating you, but it is misleading. And you will have the sources listed also on the information that goes out, the resources that you will be sending out, the Taylor. So you too can grow wildflowers successfully. You just have to remember those few things about needing exposure to light. And the other people who are helping me in the presentation for today are Ann Hudson, Wilma Gordon, and Kathy Patterson, and I thank them. They are all very experienced and probably should have been the speaker instead of me, but they were shy. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Lois. We got some time for some questions, but before we do that, I actually have another poll that I want everyone to answer, and as well as and I just put that poll up. So it's actually, after completing the program, I intend on creating a wildflower meadow or sow more seeds. And then after completing the program, I intend on incorporating more wildflowers into my landscape. So the first one's more about the meadows, and the other one's more about just incorporating them into your landscape in some capacity. And there, we do have a follow-up survey for today's program, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put that link into the chat box for you all. So please take that survey. We use that to help improve all of our programs. And once you actually close out of the Zoom meeting later on, I think it might actually pop up on your screen. So if you've already done it once, don't worry about doing it again if it pops up. All right, so we had quite a bit of respondents on here. So I'll go ahead and I'll hit the end polling so everyone can see that. So it seems like we have a lot of respondents plan on sowing with it for a meadow or sow more seeds, especially if you have like a meadow already or an area that you like to, you have wildflowers planted. But it also seems like a lot of people have said that they're going to try to incorporate more wildflowers into their gardens. So that's wonderful. So what I would like to do is we have some time for some questions. So feel free to fill out that survey. But while you fill that out, I'm going to ask the other Master Gardener volunteers if they can join the conversation now, and we can help address some of the questions that have been popping up. We have some in the Q&A, and we'll be able to address those. And we will be sending out an email, everybody that's attended in here today. I will have a copy of your email address at least, and we'll send a copy of all those links and resources that Lois had within the presentation.
Hey, responding to one of the questions about planting in raised beds, it would be okay for some wildflowers, but some wildflowers, like a lot of the milkweeds, like Asclepias tuberosa, have very long, deep roots, and they need them to go way down into the ground. So you should look at the Florida Native Plant Society website and see which ones, you know, will have won't have that root go so deep. And then, yes, plant with vegetables. It'll bring the pollinators, and you'll probably have better vegetable garden.
Yeah, right. The session we had last Friday for Master Gardeners with Jared Daniels showed how different farmers were now sowing wildflowers or sowing flowers beside their fields so that when the watermelons needed pollinators or the blueberries, you know, the pollinators were already there. There are times when the bees have all kinds of things to pollinate or to gather nectar and pollen from the crops, but they have to be there at the crops. And so if we in our suburban yards can keep the pollinators going between them, between those times, we are promoting their preservation.
Wonderful. Yeah, that was a great presentation that Jarrett had last week for us.
Right.
We did have, I was trying to relay some of the questions to you that we also got from YouTube, because we actually have quite a bit of people in there that have been watching live as we went through. But one of the questions is it just the once a year mowing that you all recommend for managing a wildflower meadow? And I noticed what was mentioned in the in the presentation, but are there any specific recommendations, like if you're growing one specific wildflower species that might be like a warm season wildflower versus like a cool season flower? Does that end up
Right.
impacting it?
Yes, I mentioned once a year. I was thinking of what the wildflower meadow that my daughter had created, where she had all different flowers. But I think it would be good for Wilma to speak to what they did in that meadow of coreopsis. Can you answer, Wilma? Are you available?
Yes, in our coreopsis meadow, and it's coreopsis visalis,
Yes.
we wait until the coreopsis has gone to seed. Usually by the end of July, everything is all dry. And after all the seed heads, or nearly all of them, are dry, we go ahead and mow that area until September, every couple weeks. And that way it helps keep the weed seeds from also germinating. And it looks neater. And no one in the HOA can complain about our messy coreopsis seeds when they're mowed down.
Thank you, Wilma.
Let's see. Let's talk about some of these other questions that we have here. Do you have any recommendations on some that you'd like to plant in the springtime or sow in the springtime?
Yes. Okay, there's Cosmos sulphurus, which is native to Mexico, not here, but it grows very well here. There's a rosy colored version, and there's the orangey yellow version, and that will reseed. And Anne and Kathy can jump in, and Wilma on natives. I'm thinking of other flowers. Well, for instance, those moonflowers, you would have to sow those in the spring, and that's a large seed. That's an exception to what I said about the other wildflower seeds. You'd soak them for a little bit, and then you would plant them, and you would put them down into the soil a little ways. So that's one that's native. There also are Mexican sunflowers, not Mexican petunias. And again, they're not native to here, but they grow and reseed nicely. They get very tall, big orange flower that the butterflies just love. There are always butterflies on it if the sun is out and they're in bloom. Can the rest of you panelists think of some others that you would sow in the spring? I know there are more.
I think a lot of the annuals you can go in the spring, because things like salvia and gagliardia, they'll come up. They might not come up as early as they would have if you planted them in the fall, but they'll still come up, and some of them bloom all the way through October.
Yeah, I think that the blanket flower pretty much seeds all year round, even though they recommend sowing it in the fall. And I know Wilma always has seedlings coming up in the spring.
Don't forget the perennial wildflowers also.
And so which ones would you recommend here?
Mist flower can be seed, or you can buy plants from that. Burkelia, swamp sunflower, Pacra aria, golden groundsel. I mean, there's numerous ones. If we were having the native plant sale at fall, which we're not, we could really stock up, but there'll be one in spring, and we can do that.
Yeah, and the IFAS documents on the wildflowers gives you the time frame to sow them, as well as the time frame in which they bloom.
Yeah, and we'll share that information with everybody too. Let's see. Could we talk a little bit about timing again? Because I actually have quite a few questions in the Q&A that have to do with sowing timing. You gave a really good response earlier about kind of generalized locations in the state. Could you give that like the south, central versus north?
Yes, for North Florida, the Wildflower Foundation recommends sowing in September. These are the things that we are most familiar with blooming beside the road in the spring. The Coreopsis basalis and the phlox, the ones that put on that really showy show. And the other Coreopsis would probably be sown then, even though they bloom later in the year. So that's for North Florida. For Central Florida, down around Orlando, and that probably includes Hillsborough County, November is the best month. Here, where we're sort of sandwiched between, I remember Wendy Wilbur telling me late October is the best time. But because I plant the tulips and usually overcast with some wildflower seeds then, I have sown as late as December. So, but definitely before the first of the year. And South Florida, I really don't know about, but you can find that information on the IFAS documents.
And you mentioned the phlox. What kind of phlox was that you mentioned?
Yes, it's Phlox Drummondi, and I think it's a little bit ironic. It's named for an Englishman, Mr. Drummond, who came over and found them in Texas and took them, spreading them around. And there is some controversy about whether or not they were originally in the Panhandle. Yeah, that's the one. These are not the perennial phlox that you can buy and plant in your yard. These are the annual phlox.
Oh, go ahead, Ann.
Okay, there's a webinar coming up by the Florida Wildflower Federation or Foundation. It is growing wildflowers within HOA. And I believe that is coming up in October. So if you want to go on that website, Florida Wildflower Foundation, those are free webinars.
Perfect. There was a question that popped up earlier that was in the chat box. I also see it again in the Q&A. It has to do with seed source and seed treatment. Is it important to make sure that our seeds are not treated with some type of insecticide like a neonicotinoid? And I can answer that if you want me to.
Why don't you tell me, because I don't know that they are.
So pretty much the ones that we're getting that are harvested through like the Seed Collective or the Florida Wildflower Foundation, they're not going to be. But it's always very important that you do check on the seed source and how they are collected and harvested. Because there is always a concern of neonicotinoids and their impact on insect species. So if you look at some of those sources that we have that we mentioned in here, and you can find there's actually an online directory on the Florida Wildflower Foundation webpage to find sources as well. Those will all be well vetted sources that you can find. I wouldn't recommend purchasing wildflower seeds through an unknown resource online, because I know that you can find wildflower packets through like Amazon and stuff like that. Because part of also not only just how it's treated or managed before it's packaged and shipped, another concern is where is that source coming from? Because there's always concerns with genetic diversity that's associated with where the sources are coming from, as well as, say a seed is collected in northern states, or a more cooler climate, that seed, even though that same species can be found here, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be hardened or it's going to be that it'll be able to survive our hot temperatures. So trying to find it from a reputable source here locally within at least the state of Florida, you're going to have a good luck with the establishment of the seed. Well, just of it being good for our climate conditions, but as well as making sure that's coming from a reliable source, so you don't have to have that concern about neonicotinoids. So that's a good question.
And the other thing is, you don't want your seeds to be 18 years old. So if you're buying from the Florida Wildflower Foundation, I work with Terry's Inn, and those seeds, the native seeds, are only the best for the first year or two. So the seeds that you're going to get there are not going to be old seeds. And the same with the working food folks. They're doing locally within Gainesville and Alachua County seed collection.
And y'all are pretty much harvesting them and turning them around and sending them out to people. So that downtime is very, very short. Yeah.
The one place in Gainesville where you can get the seeds packages from the Florida Wildflower Foundation are there. I know they're sold at Garden Gate. They may be sold other places too, but I know they have them there.
I see a question in the chat box. What are your thoughts on dandelion? I love dandelion, so.
Dandelions are a good example of how weed seeds can outcompete other flowers.
Mm-hmm.
I once, just as an experiment, and I don't think we really have the true dandelion here, do
No.
we?
Mm-mm.
Okay, but I grew up in Wisconsin, and so I was at my parents' and I collected some dandelions that were not yet open and put them in water, and they bloomed, and they went to seed in the house. And after a week or two, the seeds were floating through the house. So no wonder they're so prolific.
Mm-mm.
There are some interesting stories on the Florida Department of Transportation site about how some wildflowers, like the phlox, got to be scattered around Florida. One is that some women from the Gainesville Garden Club took some phlox seed, put it with some soil and a little bit of fertilizer and some kind of gelatinous substance, made these little balls, and then drove around and threw out the balls into the sides of the road. That's one story. Another story is that there was somebody who worked on the railroad, and as he traveled around would throw out the phlox seed. And of course, those are not authoritatively documented, but seeds do get around, just like Jenny Appleseed got around.
So we do have a question still in the Q&A. It says, "Is purslane native?" I just looked that one up though. Okay. There is, most of them are non-native, but there is one species is pilosa, Portulaca pilosa. That is a native species here in Florida, but most of them are non-native. I think one thing that we're really missing out on, and I'm kind of, it's kind of one of the bummers about being on Zoom is, Lois, you're talking a lot about the seeds and how you use your mining equipment to sift through all of the seeds. Kathy has a wonderful seed demonstration that we can use for tables where she has all the seeds kind of in little containers. And then you can try to figure out if you can ID the seeds. I can't. I got a couple of them.
Yeah, you shouldn't be embarrassed if you kind of get to the seed head and you go, I'm sorry, I don't even know what the seed is. Right. I mean, it's something we all should have learned all a long time ago, but sometimes there's a lot of chaff on there and you don't want to plant something that isn't really the seed. So it's a good thing to know. Absolutely. And there's hardly anything online where you can actually see something that small and distinguish exactly what it is.
Right.
And I would say we've been talking about planting in the soil, but you can plant in greenhouses or in warming trays in the winter. And there's nothing like, if you're really new, seeing that first little seedling come up and pop its head up and those first two cotyledons come up, and that's always an option too, to just make it more personal. And it's just very exciting for a newbie to just plant something in a little pot and have it come up.
Yeah, I've done some wildflowers in containers. When I used to work in a botanical garden, we were growing them all the time. We would start containers, wildflower containers, in the winter. So when we would bring them out in early spring, we have full blooms of different, I think we had about 20 different wildflowers. This is in Kentucky, that we would have in all of our containers.
Some don't transplant that well. Some really do better to be sowed in place. But
yeah,
they come up in the lawn because we don't spray our lawn. And so I try to rescue them before my husband mows them and put them into a flower bed. And if they're just a couple inches high, you can usually do that. Yes. Okay.
Wonderful. We've worked our way through all of these questions. It was really nice seeing, that someone said that they're inspired to be able to start doing some of these changes. And even on the live feed on YouTube, got a lot of great comments from participants saying that they're excited to go out and start trying to plant some wildflowers themselves. So I want to thank you all so much for giving such an inspiring program this afternoon about wildflowers. And I know that we have people from all over the state of Florida and some people from the out of state. So I think, there's some nuances that's important to be considered, that, there are some regional specifics that we need to think about, like what you can plant. But your recommendations that you all gave this afternoon were primarily for Central Florida, but a lot of those recommendations work really well statewide of Florida. So, but thank you all very, very much. And thanks everybody for joining us today.
Thank you, Taylor, for manning the whole situation.